Hello, everyone. I am Dr. Kristen of the Good Doctors of Abbey Research, here today with a review on our Abbey Research Reads channel. If you are interested in our kind of content on other topics, we cover culture, both popped and lived, with this kind of same lens of empathy building and analysis from a social science perspective, then make sure to like and subscribe to both this channel and our other channel, Abbey Research, which will be linked below. This channel is all about books because we're big book nerds. The other channel is more about things that we watch, streaming content, conversations as such. Today, I am covering 1997's nonfiction bestseller, The Rape of Nanking by Iris Chang. You may be thinking 1997, that's a throwback. Well, you're not wrong, but I hadn't even heard of it until we did our Colonizers World Tour week on Japan. That those links will be below if you want to experience that with us. As Dr. Aaron and I were learning about Japanese culture and colonization and its relationship with colonization and how it behaved as a colonizer and all of those things, we were shocked to learn that actually the Japanese military killed more Chinese citizens in World War II than pretty much the Russians and Nazis combined. And one of the biggest events was an event called the Rape of Nanking, which took place in 1937 to 1938. Iris Chang this is the definitive work on it. And so as soon as I learned about it, I requested this book from the library and was like, I'm going to dig right in. It is, as a nonfiction book, like it won a ton of awards for a reason. It's compelling, it's clear, it's really, really well articulated. I never felt overwhelmed by the information. Some nonfiction books can get really, really heavy into the details. This one never really did. It was just very, both this is what happened and this is kind of what it means. And she does a lot of social analysis. I do want to read a couple quotes really quick to kind of explain why this book worked so well for me. So here's what she says on page 14. This book is not intended as a commentary on the Japanese character or as the genetic makeup of the people who would commit such acts. It is about the power of cultural forces, either to make devils of us all, to strip away that thin veneer of social restraint that makes humans humane, or to reinforce it. Germany is today a better place because Jews have not allowed that country to forget what it did nearly 60 years ago. The American South is a better place for its acknowledgement of the evil of slavery and the 100 years of Jim Crowism that followed emancipation. Japanese culture will not move forward until it too admits not only to the world, but to itself how improper were its actions of just a half a century ago. That's pretty much the posture of Abbey Research in so many ways, that we're not trying to condone actions, we're trying to understand them, and we're trying to place them into wider sociological contexts. Much like the Rwandan genocide and large-scale acts all over the place, there's really great evidence in this book that there was a range of motivations and a range of commitment levels within those who perpetrated the acts. There's a couple things that really got me about the Rape of Nanking, full stop, that are in this book. First of all, the city of Nanking actually fell really, really easily as the Japanese soldiers approached it. And then they hung around for 7 weeks to torture, rape, murder, mutilate hundreds and thousands of people. They can't figure out how many women were raped because there's not the records. The numbers range from 20,000 to 80,000. And my guess is that they're probably closer to 100,000 looking at the rates of torture at the rest of stuff. They use people's heads as decorations around the walls. I mean, I've read some really, really nasty stuff that happened, for instance, in Bosnia and Herzegovina, in Rwanda, during apartheid in South Africa. And this was, I mean, guys, this was a specific, whoo, buddy, it was a lot. It was a lot. But the book does exactly what Chang sets it out to do. It examines the cultural stuff at play and particularly pays attention to the fact that Japan now no longer talks about it. It's not taught to Japanese school children, whereas in Germany, at least in 1997, and I can't find any evidence that this has changed. If you have gone to school in Japan, please tell us if it has changed. I can't find any evidence that it has. But Chang makes the point that in Germany, it is illegal to ignore Nazism. And Japan, as of 1997, and I can't find any evidence this has changed, has no such law. One more quote before I let you guys go. So she says that there are 3 factors into why Nanking went as crazy as it did. First is that there's, and this is according to Japanese scholars, she quotes some other people, including Tanaka Yuki, author of Hidden Horrors, Japanese War Crimes in World War II, says that the Japanese army in particular had a great potential for brutality because of the culture of the Japanese military itself. It was arbitrary and very cool indifference. While there was a strict hierarchical nature of society, punishments were not meted out equally. You kind of never knew when something terrible was about to happen. I quote from her from page 217 of the book. It has often been suggested that those with the least power often become the most sadistic if given the power of life over people even lower in the pecking order. And rage engendered by the rigid pecking order of the Japanese military and Japanese society was given an outlet when Japanese society went abroad. In foreign land or colonized territories, the Japanese soldiers enjoyed tremendous power over the subjects. We see this everywhere. So that's one sociological factor. The second is that part of the very fabric of Japanese military at the time was a contempt for Chinese people. The othering of human beings, to treat them as less than human beings, is one of the major pieces of any mass atrocity. Very, very famously, Hutus and Tutsis. That happened both in the major 1994 genocide and also in the minor genocides, the other skirmishes that happened in post-colonial Rwanda. Language like cockroaches is thrown around. We see it in some of the British government acts against the citizens of Northern Ireland during the Troubles, and how the documents refer to Catholic individuals, for instance. So you have that. So to quote from her again, though the Japanese and Chinese share similar, if not identical, racial features, there were those in the Imperial Army who saw the Chinese as subhuman beings whose murder would carry no greater moral weight than squashing a bug or butchering a hog. That is a systemic choice made by the leaders of the military to encourage, or even just allow, but potentially encourage that kind of language and the othering. When I talk to my friends who have served in the military, the dehumanization of the enemy is a really key part of serving in the military. And the dehumanization, one of the things, actually, I had a friend very, very candidly share with me that the most difficult thing for him after coming back from several tours in Iraq was that the people that he was taught were not humans looked exactly the same as the people that he went grocery shopping next to once he got back to the States. And that kind of dissonance was very, very difficult for him. So the third factor in why the rape of Nanking happened at the level of violence it did, according to Chang, is religion. Now, in Japanese culture, especially at this time, which is World War II, the religion was the emperor. The emperor was higher than God. And if they're going to choose between God and the emperor, they're going to choose the emperor. The emperor wants them to eradicate the Chinese population of Nanking so that they can do these kind of things. So to quote her again, with a higher entity than God on its side, it was not difficult for Japanese military to take the next mental step, adopting the belief that the war, even the violence that came with it, would ultimately benefit not only Japan, but its victims as well. We saw this in the Crusades. We see this throughout any holy war in which you believe you're serving a deity higher than yourself. And honestly, we even see it in American military campaigns, that any violence we commit is justified, and it'll actually be for your own good because we're going to end up creating a better society. Back to the quote. Some perceived atrocity as a necessary tool to achieve Japanese victory that would serve all and help create a better China under Japan's Greater East Asian Co-Prosperity Sphere. That's a mouthful. I'm assuming in Japanese it's maybe 2 words. This attitude echoes that of the Japanese teachers whose officers who beat their students and soldiers senseless while insisting between blows that it was before their own good. There's a massive connection to how masculinity and hierarchy is treated within Japanese schools. At this time, most schools in Japan were actually quite influenced by the military. They worked like military schools. So every time they were beaten, it was for their own good. I think it's important to understand all of these things. At the end of the day, there's still hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Chinese people dead. The legacy of this is insane. There were women in particular who, because they were raped, they were seen as so incredibly almost like persona non gratas within their town that they were ostracized. The rate of suicide or death by suicide wasn't even calculated. The children born of this were often left to die on roads. There was an incalculable cost, both personal and corporately, to this act. Just because we can maybe understand some of the justifications behind it does not mean that Japan is off the hook. As Chang said in the beginning, unless they take the lessons that everyone is trying to teach them, unless they acknowledge that these were problems and fix them, all this does is just show monstrous behavior, and that's it. That's all we know. The key, even in our own lives, is when we are shown monstrous behavior, is to figure out how to fix it. And as I've said, even if there's been restitution or if there's been a public apology to the people of Nanking, which there may have been, and I've missed it in my research, unless there is active work to deconstruct the othering, to deconstruct the militarization of society, to work around the hierarchy, to understand that people below you are not less than you in a way, it's entirely possible this kind of thing can happen again. I can't recommend this book highly enough, to be honest. I know we say that a lot on this channel. I love this book. I recommend this book. This is one that's like even a little bit skimmable, because if you're not super into the military tactics, as I wasn't, there was chapters I just kind of flipped through, and then I really parked, like, for instance, in the couple sections where they talked about, for instance, this is where comfort homes started, where they gathered women in state-sanctioned prostitution. And the Japanese government has apologized to the women of the comfort house, but like, so I could really kind of park there and sit there. There's also a documentary, I'm told, or a movie that came out in 2007, and we'll try to track it down. By the last time I searched, I couldn't find it on a streaming service here in the States, but we'll try to track it down and maybe even cover it and add it to the Japanese World Tour, the Colonized World Tour chapter on Japan resource sheet. Below, you'll find a link to that resource sheet and also the several videos we did on Japanese culture as part of that week. There's Japan 101, which is just a run through. There's some coverage of art of Japan. There's a book review for a really great book called Convenience Store Woman. I talk with Dr. Hinson's brother about the specific way that gaming culture kind of works in modern Japan. But if we were going to be totally positive about Japan, it would be really, really, we would be doing the same thing the Japanese government is doing, and we refuse to not look at everything as complicated as we possibly can. So that's it for today's edition of Abbey Research Reads. I am Dr. Kristen, and I will see you next time. Bye.